We've passed the point of no return with Donald Trump. And if we don't call him out for his responsible activities in encouraging this, we're responsible as well.
Do you have any comment on the actual news story?
I just said I condemn political violence in all situations.
The ICE situation.
You did.
Keith Boykin completely shut down the smug MAGA supporter Scott Jennings during Abby Phillips' show, this time over the actions of ICE. We're going to watch clips from another intense panel discussion, with Sarah Sidner filling in for Abby Phillip. It was incredibly satisfying to see Keith Boykin repeatedly call out Scott Jennings and refuse to let his arguments slide. I also want to share my own thoughts on everything that happened.
43-year-old Army veteran is in custody, accused of throwing an incendiary device at a federal building that houses offices for Immigration and Customs Enforcement in New York City. Now, you can see the moment that authorities say Andrew Arabaka threw the gasoline near the building. You see him throwing it there before lighting it on fire. Officials say the suspect had 2 axes, a hammer, a machete, and 3 knives, and a sign that read, quote, "ICE off our streets." The FBI warned he, quote, came armed with bad intentions. The White House border czar refused to comment on the investigation as it is ongoing, telling reporters he would let the investigation play out. But he did talk about who he thinks is partly to blame anyway, naming leftist politics for the current climate surrounding immigration enforcement.
What happened in front of the federal building is another example of attacking ICE. And I'm sure if you ask that person why he did it, he can repeat the talking points I just said that you hear from Democratic members of Congress, the Democratic mayors and governors who simply want ICE to go away. And us to keep attacking and miscommunicating what ICE does every day, calling them Nazis and comparing ICE to the Nazi regime. Are you kidding me? And for any member of Congress to keep attacking ICE and calling them fascists and Nazis, I said it 1,000 times. If they're a Nazi for enforcing the law, what's that make them? They wrote the law.
Now, before we open it up to the table here, we invite you at home to join this debate. Head to CNN.com/Abby and weigh in. We'll get to some of your comments throughout the show. Scott, I'm going to start with you. Words do matter. So do actions, right? I think we've talked about this before with, Republicans saying things, Democrats saying things, and then there's the actions of ICE as well. When you look at this, do you agree with Homan that this is something that is because of Democrats, or is this a single guy who decided to do something that was illegal?
Of course I agree with Homan, and it's not a single guy. This is another in a long string of attacks on ICE personnel, ICE facilities. There's been a massive spike in violence against ICE agents, really against all law enforcement, specifically federal law enforcement out there. So I think Mr. Homan is absolutely correct. And I think you've got members of Congress, the mayor of New York City, governors, as Homan said, all sorts of people out there who are using language that would lead someone to go do these kinds of things. It's despicable. These people are effectively political vigilantes. They've been programmed by the left to go out and take matters into their own hands. And it ought to be stopped right now. I noticed Mamdani today, put out a statement saying, this is bad, we're going to cooperate. This is the same guy who has said some of the worst things about ICE, who says he wants to defund the police. And makes a lot of anti-law enforcement rhetoric a staple of his political movement. I don't know how you can reconcile those positions, and I don't suppose they'll even try, but I think Homan's right.
But is it possible that it is the actions of ICE that have people talking like this, not just getting messaging from the Democrats, but seeing what's happening in their communities?
So if you believe that a government agency is doing something that you don't like, and your choices are A, cast a vote, B, use your words, or C, go set off an incendiary device at the federal building in New York City, and you pick C, there is no justification for this. There's no rationalization of it, and it's patently ridiculous if that is what anybody's going to argue tonight.
Keith, how do you
Let's take Scott's scenario. If you believe a government agency is doing something wrong, do you use your vote, do you use your words, or do you resort to violence? In one very clear example, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, implicitly encouraged people to resort to violence. That was the January 6th insurrection. He didn't tell people your vote was enough. The 80-something lawsuits that we filed were enough. He didn't tell people we're just going to settle this in sort of a peaceful way. He actually encouraged people to walk from the ellipse to the Capitol, not knowing what might happen, and knowing that these people were armed and violent. This guy, Donald Trump, is responsible for some of the worst, most incendiary, most politically violent rhetoric in our country. So I don't accept this statement from Scott at all. Violence, political violence is wrong, whether it's left or right. The problem is I don't know any president on the Democratic side in my lifetime who's ever encouraged political violence. In fact, I don't know any Republican president in my lifetime who's ever encouraged political violence until Donald Trump. We have crossed the proverbial standard here. We've passed the point of no return with Donald Trump. And if we don't call him out for his responsible activities in encouraging this, we're responsible as well.
Do you have any comment on the actual news story?
I just said I condemn political violence in all situations. What you did is you took this situation and you agreed with Tom Holman's talking point that somehow this is a Democratic case. But the reality is the studies have shown that in the past decade or so, 112 of the past right-wing, of the 112 right-wing murders have taken place. Only 13 have taken place from the left.
So you don't have any comment on this?
No, I just told. What else is there to say except I condemn it, Scott? You want me to say more than that?
Yeah.
What else? You don't say. Hey, you haven't said yet. What have you said about Donald Trump and the January 6th insurrection? The fact that he pardons people. The fact that he actually tried to create a $1.8 billion fund to support those people.
I'm long on the record about.
I absolutely love watching Keith Boykin lay out the facts while Scott Jennings sits there with that smug expression on his face. Scott Jennings asks Keith Boykin, "Do you have any comments on this story?" Which is pretty ironic because Scott Jennings is the same person who goes on Abby Phillips' show night after night, and no matter what the topic is or what anyone on the left, a Democrat, or a liberal says about Donald Trump, his response is always, "Yeah, but what about Biden?" or "Yeah, but what about the Democrats?" It's pretty rich for Scott Jennings to tell someone to stay on topic when he's the one who constantly changes the subject by bringing up Democrats. He also repeats the usual talking point that violence against law enforcement is increasing. In 2025, 109 law enforcement officers died while on duty, but most of those deaths were not caused by violent attacks. The majority were the result of traffic accidents, which remains one of the leading causes of officer deaths. Compare that to 1975, when 240 officers died on duty even though the country's population was much smaller. Once again, it's another misleading claim pushed by MAGA voices like Scott Jennings. Another thing Keith Boykin clearly shows here, at least in my view, is the difference between the left and the right. Keith Boykin condemns violence no matter who commits it, whether it's someone on the left or someone on the right. Scott Jennings doesn't do the same. He only criticizes violence when it comes from the left. He never seems willing to call out violence committed by the right, and he's certainly never going to criticize the person he constantly defends, Donald Trump. Let's watch a little more of what Scott Jennings has to say.
The reason why Democrats did not do anything about that is because your president, Donald Trump, told them not to. They had a bipartisan immigration bill, and Donald Trump called up the United States senators and said, "Do not pass that bill."
No, I'm talking about the law.
I'm talking about immigration enforcement.
Right.
You said, "Why didn't Democrats do something about all the immigrants coming in?" They tried to do something, and Donald Trump said, "Don't do it."
No,
as far as reforming or limiting ICE, Democrats are taking action right now. They're sending a letter. First of all, not that that's enough.
Why didn't they just stop the illegal immigration?
But 10 people have been killed by ICE since this year.
A lot of people have been killed by illegal
ICE in the past year. Since Donald Trump took office. That didn't happen under Biden's administration.
Let me make sure I understand. This deranged anti-ICE leftist tries to blow up the federal office in New York today, and that's Donald Trump's fault. Joe Biden.
Nobody said that.
You just gave a long.
Here we go again. Scott Jennings was just telling Keith Boykin, "Why can't you stay on the subject? Don't you have a comment on this story?" Yet only moments later, he goes right back to his usual routine with the same old, "Yeah, but what about Biden?" argument. It's completely predictable. Like clockwork, Scott Jennings falls back on the exact tactic he was criticizing just moments earlier.
No one said that.
Joe Biden doesn't enforce immigration laws, and that's Donald Trump's fault. I'm trying to identify the end of the choose your own adventure book where it doesn't end with it's Donald Trump's fault. Stephen is right. They did not enforce the law. And you know who will tell you that? Anybody that works for ICE today will tell you when they were working there under Biden, they were told not to enforce immigration law. We haven't passed any new laws. And today, we had the 14th straight month of no releases at the border. The border is closed. Not a single new law was passed. The only difference is the feds are enforcing longstanding existing law. And you have Democrats now demonizing the people enforcing it, and you have people like this lunatic showing up trying to blow up the federal building.
Nobody's supporting this guy who did the firebombing at the federal building today. So let's get that clear. What we are saying is that if you're going to condemn political violence, at least be consistent, because the top purveyor of political violence in our country is Donald Trump.
Let me just
That was a real mic drop moment from Keith Boykin. He argued that Donald Trump has been the biggest source of political violence in the United States, and Scott Jennings had no real answer. Instead, he just flashed his usual smirk, looked into the camera, and took a sip of his drink because there was nothing meaningful he could say except his familiar, "Yeah, but what about Biden?" response. That's the only argument he ever seems to fall back on. Scott Jennings doesn't offer strong policy arguments or positions that connect with most Americans. Instead, so much of what comes from MAGA and Donald Trump is based on projection. They constantly accuse the left of being responsible for political violence while insisting that left-wing leaders encourage it. Keith Boykin also pointed to the deaths involving ICE, saying that 10 people had been killed. In his view, that number should be 0. He also argued that there haven't been cases showing those killed by ICE were violent criminals, which is why he believes Scott Jennings' claims that the left promotes violence are misleading. Keith Boykin maintained that people like Representative Maxine Waters are not calling for violence, while arguing that Donald Trump's rhetoric has contributed to political tensions. He made those points clearly during Abby Phillips' show, but Scott Jennings showed no sign of accepting that argument. Now I'd like to hear what you think. Do you agree with Keith Boykin's perspective, or do you believe Scott Jennings is right when he shifts the focus to Biden and the Democrats? Share your thoughts in the comments about this heated debate on Abby Phillips' show, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more.